The chains snapped before the human finished tightening the bolt. The sound wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Every soldier in the war arena went still. The floor vibrated. Dust fell from the ceiling arches. Then the gates began to open. Slowly. Deliberately. And the crowd rose to its feet. Because they knew what was coming. The predator. It had ended revolutions. It had devoured assassins. It had once torn through an armored transport while still sedated. They called it Vorith the Devourer. And today, it had been released for one purpose. Kill the human mechanic. Down on the arena floor stood Marcus Hale. Oil-stained sleeves rolled to his elbows. Tool harness strapped across his chest. A small plasma wrench still humming faintly in his grip. He wasn't supposed to be here. He was supposed to be repairing docking clamps. But he had corrected a warlord. And in the Empire, that was a crime worse than sabotage. Above him, seated on a throne carved from the skull of a leviathan, was Overlord Zarex. Tall. Armored. Expressionless. You claimed, Zarex's amplified voice thundered across the arena, that my beast suffers from poor conditioning. Marcus didn't look up. I said your neural override is misfiring, he replied calmly. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The gates finished opening. And Vorith stepped into the light. It was massive. 4-legged. 12 feet long. Shoulders rippling with lead muscle under dark armored hide. 2 forward curving fangs like sabers. A ridge of spines running down its back. Its eyes locked onto Marcus. The predator inhaled. Slow. Measuring. The crowd waited for the human to run. Marcus didn't move. He clipped the plasma wrench to his belt. And wiped his hands on a rag. Yeah, he muttered under his breath. I figured it'd be you. Vorith's lip curled. A low growl rolled across the arena like distant thunder. Overlord Zarex raised one armored hand. Release aggression protocol. The beast's pupils constricted. A sharp mechanical pulse flickered beneath the skin at the base of its skull. Its body tensed. Then it charged. The arena floor cracked under its weight. Each step was an earthquake. Balconies shook. Several spectators stumbled backward. Vorith covered half the arena in 3 strides. Marcus finally moved. 1 step forward. Not back. Forward. The predator leapt. Claws out. Jaws wide. Teeth big enough to sever him in half. Time seemed to slow. Some in the crowd turned away. Others leaned forward, eager. But instead of diving aside, instead of screaming, Marcus raised one hand, palm open, and said one word. Easy. The beast landed in front of him. Stone shattered. Dust exploded upward. Its jaws snapped shut inches from his face. Hot breath washed over him. The growl deepened. The neural implant at the base of its skull flickered violently. Marcus didn't flinch. Didn't blink. He stared into the predator's eyes. And for a split second, something changed. The beast hesitated. Just long enough for the entire empire to feel it. Up on the throne, Zarex leaned forward. Confusion tightening his jaw. Why, the Overlord whispered, is it not finishing him? Down below, Marcus tilted his head slightly. He could see it now. The irritation around the implant seam. The muscle spasms. The misfiring aggression spikes. He lowered his voice. They wired you wrong, didn't they? Vorith's growl faltered. Just slightly. The crowd went silent. Because this wasn't how executions worked. And for the first time in recorded Imperial history, the Devourer had stopped mid-kill. And the human mechanic was still standing. The growl should have ended him. Instead, it faltered. Vorith's jaws hovered inches from Marcus Hale's face. Heat rolled from its breath. Threads of saliva snapped against the cracked arena floor. The crowd waited for the snap of bone. It didn't come. Marcus didn't move. Didn't blink. He kept his palm raised, fingers slightly spread. Not commanding. Not threatening. Steady. The neural implant at the base of Vorith's skull pulsed again. A sharp blue flicker beneath armored hide. The beast flinched. Just slightly. Most in the arena missed it. Marcus didn't. There it is, he murmured. Up on the throne, Overlord Zarex stood slowly. Why has the aggression spike not completed? He demanded. An Imperial handler checked his wrist console, confused. Override signal is active, my lord. Pain amplifiers are engaged. Pain amplifiers. Marcus' jaw tightened. Vorith's lips peeled back again, but this time the growl was different. Less rage. More strain. The implant pulsed harder. The beast's pupils dilated unevenly. Its front claws twitched against the stone. The crowd began whispering. Something was wrong. Marcus lowered his voice, speaking only for the predator to hear. They've been forcing it, haven't they? Vorith's head tilted, barely perceptible. Another pulse from the implant. This one harsher. The beast recoiled half a step and snarled, not at Marcus. At the sky. At the throne. At the signal. The arena went silent. Overlord Zarex slammed his staff against the stone. Complete the execution. The command echoed. The implant flared violently. Vorith jerked as if struck by lightning. Its muscles spasmed. Its jaws opened wide again. And it lunged. Gasps exploded from the balconies. Marcus moved at last. Not away. He stepped inside the lunge. One hand grabbing the thick armored ridge along the predator's neck. The other reaching directly for the base of its skull. The impact knocked him sideways, but he held on. Claws tore through stone where he'd been standing. The crowd screamed. Guards lifted rifles. Dust clouded the arena floor. When it cleared, Marcus was still there, pressed against the beast's neck. His fingers tracing along the implant seam. Yeah, he muttered. They botched the neural calibration. Vorith thrashed again, but the movement was weaker now. Conflicted. The implant flickered chaotically. Pain signals misfiring. Aggression routines colliding. Marcus braced his boots against the stone and spoke louder. You're not angry, he said firmly. You're overloaded. The beast froze mid-swipe. One massive claw hung inches from Marcus' shoulder. Its breathing shifted. From rage. To confusion. To something almost desperate. Up above, panic crept into Zarex's voice. Why is the bond not enforcing dominance? A handler swallowed. My lord, the human is in physical contact with the implant housing. Zarex's eyes widened. Separate them. Guards hesitated. Because Vorith wasn't attacking. It wasn't even trying to throw the human off. It was trembling. Marcus pulled a slim diagnostic key from his tool harness. Not a weapon. A mechanic's interface spike. He pressed it gently against the implant seam. The crowd gasped. Human, Zarex roared, step away from my beast. Marcus ignored him. He leaned close to Vorith's ear and spoke softly. I can shut it off. But you've got to hold still. 4-3 heartbeats, nothing happened. Then, the devourer lowered its head. And went still. Across the arena, thousands watched the impossible. The Empire's most feared predator. Obeying. Not the throne. Not the signal. But the human mechanic. Marcus inserted the interface spike. The implant flared violently one last time. Energy crackled across Vorith's spines. Guards raised weapons. Zarex shouted something lost in the chaos. Then the arena screens flickered. Aggression protocol, unstable. Pain amplification, critical error. Marcus exhaled slowly. Found it. The beast's breathing steadied. Not calm. Not yet. But no longer driven by forced agony. Vorith lifted its head. Its eyes were different now. Clearer. Focused. Aware. And for the first time since it had entered the arena, it wasn't looking at Marcus like prey. It was looking at him like a choice. Up on the throne, Overlord Zarex whispered, almost to himself. What have you done? Down below, Marcus kept one hand resting against the predator's armored neck. He didn't smile. Didn't celebrate. He simply answered. I stopped hurting it. And in that moment, something far more dangerous than aggression took root inside the arena. Trust. Silence swallowed the arena. Not fear. Not confusion. Something heavier. Vorith stood motionless beneath Marcus Hale's hand. The massive predator that had once crushed armored divisions was no longer trembling in forced rage. Its breathing had slowed. Its muscles were no longer locked in permanent aggression. It was thinking. The arena screen still flickered overhead. Pain amplification, disengaged. Neural override, interrupted. Command priority, unstable. Up on the throne, Overlord Zarex's knuckles tightened around his staff. Reinitialize dominance protocol, he ordered. A handler worked frantically at his console. It's not responding, my lord. The human's interface spike disrupted the aggression loop. Zarex's gaze hardened. Then remove the human. Guards along the arena walls lifted plasma rifles. Marcus heard the hum. He didn't look up. His eyes remained on Vorith. The predator's pupils adjusted slowly, no longer jerking from pain spikes. Its massive chest rose and fell in controlled breaths. Marcus kept his voice low. "They made you fight everything," he murmured. "Didn't give you a choice." Vorith's ear twitched. Above, Zarek stood. "Fire." The rifles charged. And Vorith moved. Not toward Marcus. Not toward escape. It turned. Its massive body pivoting between the human and the firing line. Energy bolts struck its armored hide. Sparks burst outward. The beast didn't flinch. A growl rolled from its chest, not feral, not enraged. Protective. The crowd erupted into shouting. "That creature shields him," someone cried. Zarek's eyes widened. "Impossible." Marcus slowly stepped around Vorith's shoulder. "Easy," he said quietly. "You don't need to fight them." The predator's head lowered slightly. Not submissive. Measured. Zarek slammed his staff into the throne platform. "Activate full neural override." The handler's face drained of color. "My lord, the implant housing is no longer synchronized. If we force a surge, it could burn out the entire nervous interface." Zarek hesitated. For the first time. Marcus seized it. He pulled the interface spike from the implant seam and held it up for the cameras to see. "You wired aggression directly into pain receptors," he called out, voice echoing through the arena. "Every command you gave it hurt." Murmurs spread through the crowd. Some spectators shifted uncomfortably. Zarek's expression turned cold. "It is a war asset." Marcus shook his head. "No. It's alive." Vorith slowly stepped forward. The ground trembled. Guards backed away instinctively. Marcus placed a hand flat against the creature's armored jaw. "You don't belong on a leash." The predator's massive head dipped. Then lower. Then lower still. Until one foreleg bent. Then the other. Vorith knelt. The arena gasped as one. The Empire's symbol of unstoppable domination. Kneeling. Not to the throne. To a grease-stained human mechanic. Zarek's voice cracked with fury. "It is conditioned to obey only imperial authority." Marcus looked up at him calmly. "You removed the conditioning when you removed the pain." Vorith exhaled heavily, almost like a sigh. Marcus studied the ridge of spines along its back. A thought crossed his mind. He stepped closer. Placed one boot carefully against the beast's foreleg. And climbed. The crowd froze. He swung himself up along the armored ridge and settled between the spines, gripping naturally as if he'd done it 100 times before. Vorith did not resist. It rose slowly. Marcus now seated high above the arena floor. The image burned into every broadcast drone. A human mechanic riding the Empire's deadliest predator. Zarek staggered back one step. "Stop them," he roared. But no one moved. Because Vorith wasn't attacking. It wasn't raging. It turned its massive head toward the arena gates. Then back toward Marcus. Waiting. Choosing. Marcus leaned forward slightly. "You want out?" The predator's muscles coiled. The guards panicked. "Seal the exits." Too late. Vorith launched forward. The first bound shattered the inner barricade. The second crushed the energy barrier emitter. The third sent shockwaves through the Empire. Because for the first time in its history, the monster had chosen its rider. And the rider was human. The first gate didn't open. It exploded. Vorith hit it at full speed. Reinforced alloy meant to withstand orbital bombardment folded inward like paper. Metal shrieked. Sparks rained across the arena floor. Marcus leaned low against the predator's armored spine as debris flew past them. "Guess that answers that," he muttered. Behind them, alarms screamed. Red light flooded the palace interior. "Seal the outer perimeter." Overlord Zarex roared from his throne balcony. "Deploy suppressor cannons." Security squads poured into the arena corridors. Energy turrets descended from the ceiling. The Empire had never lost control of Vorith. Not once. Until today. Vorith burst into the grand colonnade beyond the arena, pillars shattering as its massive frame tore through imperial architecture. Plasma fire lit up the corridor. Bolts slammed into its armored hide. Some struck Marcus. He didn't flinch. The beast twisted mid-stride, shielding him instinctively. Not commanded. Not programmed. Chosen. Marcus ran one hand along the ridge of spines. "They're scared of you," he said quietly. "Funny thing is, you were never the threat." A suppressor cannon powered up ahead, blocking the exit tunnel. A glowing containment field snapped into place, sealing the outer gate. Imperial officers stood behind it, shouting orders. Vorith slowed slightly. Calculating. Marcus leaned forward. Through it. The predator didn't hesitate. It launched. The containment field shattered on impact. Energy surged violently, cascading across Voritha's armor. For a split second the world went white. Then they were through. The outer gate loomed ahead, massive, lead and armored plating thick enough to resist siege fleets. Above it, Zarex's voice echoed from external loudspeakers. Human. Dismount immediately and your execution will be merciful. Marcus actually laughed. You had your chance. Vorith accelerated. Each step cracked stone. Guards scattered. Some dropped their weapons entirely. The final defensive barricade locked into place with a thunderous boom. Marcus studied it in a glance. Load-bearing joints. Energy conduits. Structural weak point on the left hinge. He tapped Voritha's neck twice. Left side. The predator adjusted mid-stride. It hit the hinge at an angle. Not brute force. Precision. The hinge ruptured. The entire gate tore free from its frame. Sunlight exploded into the corridor. Wind rushed in. Freedom. The palace alarms faded behind them as Vorith cleared the outer threshold in a single massive leap. They landed on the vast stone causeway outside the Imperial complex. Thousands of citizens stood frozen. Transport craft hovered overhead. Every broadcast drone in the Empire tracked the moment. Marcus sat upright now. No fear. No rush. Vorith slowed to a controlled prowl. Not fleeing. Departing. Behind them, the shattered gate smoked. Imperial soldiers formed a hesitant perimeter, but none advanced. Because something fundamental had shifted. Vorith wasn't rampaging. It wasn't feral. It walked calmly beneath the human seated on its back. And that terrified them more than violence ever could. Up on the high balcony, Overlord Zarex stood rigid, watching his symbol of dominance disappear down the causeway. An advisor whispered urgently beside him. My lord, the entire galaxy is watching. Zarex's jaw tightened. 4 decades, Vorith had represented Imperial control. Power enforced through fear. Now that same creature walked free. Under the guidance of the species they had dismissed as physically inferior mechanics and laborious. Marcus glanced back once at the palace. Then forward toward the open city. He leaned down close to Voritha's ear. They used you to scare the galaxy, he said quietly. Let's show them something better. Vorith let out a deep, resonant rumble. Not a roar. Not rage. Something almost like agreement. They moved forward together into the capital streets. No chains. No commands. No pain. And for the first time in Imperial history, the Empire's greatest weapon was no longer theirs. They didn't chase him. That was the first sign the Empire understood. Vorith walked through the capital streets with deliberate calm. Not a rampage. Not chaos. Just presence. Each step echoed between towering spires of Imperial steel and stone. Citizens scattered at first. Then they stopped running. Because the monster wasn't hunting. It wasn't snarling. It wasn't tearing buildings apart. It walked steadily beneath Marcus Hale, who sat upright along the armored ridge of its back like he belonged there. Above them, broadcast drones hovered in tight formation. Every major system in the Empire was streaming the footage live. The Empire's greatest weapon. Carrying a human mechanic. Willingly. High above, in the shattered throne balcony, Overlord Zarex stood motionless. Deploy aerial suppressors, an advisor urged. Zarex didn't answer immediately. He was watching Voritha's posture. The controlled breathing. The absence of aggression. Finally, he spoke quietly. No. The advisor blinked. My lord. If we fire, Zarex said slowly, it will not defend itself. He understood now. Vorith wasn't rebelling. It had been freed. And a freed creature makes choices. Down below, Marcus guided Vorith toward the edge of the capital plateau. Beyond it stretched open plains and the distant shimmer of docking fields. He leaned forward slightly. You don't have to run, he murmured. Vorith slowed. The massive predator stopped at the edge of the plateau, overlooking the empire it had once terrorized. Wind rolled across its armored hide. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Marcus spoke louder, knowing the drones would carry his voice. You built your power on pain, he said calmly. You wired obedience through suffering. The city below was silent. You thought aggression made it strong. Vorith shifted slightly beneath him. It didn't, Marcus continued. It made it unstable. He slid down carefully from the predator's back and stood beside it. Not in front. Not behind. Beside. He rested one hand on its armored shoulder. Strength isn't forcing something to fight, he said. It's giving it a reason to choose. Across the Empire, the message landed harder than any warship strike. Because they all saw it. Vorith was not lunging. Not attacking the palace. Not tearing apart the city. It stood calmly next to the human. Choosing stillness. Back at the throne, an officer whispered, shaken. My lord, what are your orders? Zarek stared at the screen where his once feared devourer stood peacefully at the edge of his dominion. He understood the humiliation. He understood the shift. And, more importantly, he understood the warning. Stand down, Zarek said at last. The order rippled through the defense network. Weapons powered down. Aircraft disengaged. The Empire had just lost control of its symbol of fear. But if it attacked now, it would lose something worse. Its illusion of superiority. On the plateau, Marcus exhaled slowly as distant weapon systems went quiet. He gave Vorith's shoulder a firm pat. Looks like they're learning. The Predator let out a deep, rolling rumble that vibrated through the stone. Marcus glanced toward the docking fields in the distance. Whole galaxies watching, he said. What do you think? Vorith turned its massive head toward the open horizon. Then, without hesitation, it stepped forward. Not toward the palace. Not toward the city. Toward the stars. Marcus climbed back onto its armored back as it began moving down the long slope toward the docking platforms. Ships were scattering. Guards were retreating. No one tried to stop them. Because no one wanted to be the one responsible for proving the human wrong. At the base of the plateau, Vorith leapt onto the outer hull of an unattended cargo hauler preparing for departure. Metal buckled under its weight. Marcus grabbed onto the hull plating and laughed under his breath. Guess we're taking the scenic route. The hauler's startled pilot screamed over open comms as Vorith crouched low. The engines ignited. The ship lifted. And as it broke atmosphere, every broadcast drone captured the image that would echo through galactic history. A Predator once engineered for terror. Riding into the stars. With a human mechanic on its back. Hours later, Imperial analysts would begin rewriting threat assessments. Not about Vorith. About humanity. Because the Empire had learned something far more dangerous than the loss of a beast. Humans did not dominate. They understood. And when the strongest weapon in your arsenal chooses them instead of you, you don't have a military problem. You have a philosophy problem. Back in the silent throne chamber, Zarex finally spoke the words no emperor had ever needed to say before. Never corner a human who sees what you refuse to. And across the galaxy, one truth settled into every council chamber, every war room, every throne. The Empire once ruled through fear. Now it had just shown the galaxy what happens when a human removes it.